4 p.m. in Central Europe, and it's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café WebTalk, 33 minutes with Krystal Azelton. Now I pronounce the H, damn it. With Krystal Azelton will begin soon. Thanks for joining us for our talk today about the urgency of ensuring sustainability in space. As always, we appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. So, SpaceWatch.Global, as you all know, is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I would like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate that. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. The last one will featuring Moriba Jah again tomorrow morning, and it will be a really fantastic rock and roll episode, so don't miss that. We also have new exciting episodes on the Space Café radio with Charlotte Biewik and Jim Bridenstine in Lausanne. More to come, including Mr. Brian Whedon. So we also keep our fan shop open online for you to support us actively and become a real space watcher. So if you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the events section and on YouTube. Today's guest I met where you met great people in Dubai. And that was in November 2017 at UNOSA High-Level Forum. And she is a very inspiring woman with a wealth of knowledge that I really admire. So I'm very grateful that she followed my invitation to be my guest today. And with that, a very warm welcome, Krystal Azelton. So Krystal, for the few of you that does not know Krystal, but I'm quite sure most of you are here just for her. She is the Director of Space Application Programs at the Secure World Foundation and has over 10 years of international and domestic space policy, public policy, and management experience. And prior to joining the Secure World Foundation, she was a consultant at Access Partnership and also served as a project manager at the Tauri Group. For that, she led and supported production of the NASA strategic plans. Her work exposed to the full range of NASA's Earth observation, human exploration, and aviation programs, and in that role, she was also recognized as a key member of the data management team that received the NASA Group Achievement Award. And your bio sounds like a master plan for what you are doing today. So with that, again, a very warm welcome, Krystal, to our show today.
Thank you, Torsten. It's so exciting to be here with you, especially now that we're all starting to see each other again in person. But I'm pleased that we're able to connect online as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And we are competing with a number of big events worldwide right now in Abu Dhabi and in Bonn and so on. So I'm grateful for all these people, really this huge number of people that are on Zoom and on LinkedIn. So before we go deeper into our topic today, how do you define sustainability and how does this relate to your own company definition of space sustainability?
Yeah, it's an insightful question, Torsten, because when we say space sustainability or sustainability, it can mean a lot of things, right? You know, there's just the general concept of sustainability when we're kind of referring to the ability to maintain something at a certain rate or a level or an idea. But then when we typically refer to sustainability, we're referring to some kind of environmental sustainability as kind of a more common use. And there we're looking more at like the avoidance of the depletion of, say, a natural resource in order to maintain sort of an ecological balance. But sustainability also gets used a lot in business case. So sometimes when you say space sustainability or sustainability, someone's thinking like the sustainability of a business model or an industry or the ability to continue on. And so it really has a lot of definitions. But at the core is this idea that we have activities that are happening and we want to be able to continue doing them. Now, when we say space sustainability, so Secure World is, uniquely devoted to space sustainability. That's really all we're focused on. It doesn't mean that we don't tie into some of these other concepts, particularly environmental sustainability on Earth is obviously very closely tied with space activity. But when we say space sustainability, we're kind of applying this concept of sustainability to the space environment. We're trying to say that we want to promote solutions that ensure that we have a peaceful, safe, secure, and usable space environment for the long term. We take a very pragmatic approach to this. We're not an organization that's necessarily talking about the pristineness of outer space. We really want to get into that sustainable concept of, okay, how can we make use of this environment and benefit on Earth, but in a way that is not going to hamper us later on? How can we kind of learn the lessons from how we potentially, sort of used the environment on Earth in a not so sustainable way? How can we use those lessons and apply them to outer space and have a very different outcome, particularly in such a fragile and complex environment?
Absolutely, and I think it's wonderful to set this baseline that we're speaking about the same thing when we speak now further on about sustainability. I mean, our title today is the urgency of ensuring sustainability in space. I mean, why urgency? I mean, we just started in years 6 years ago with going to space or with doing something in space. So why urgency?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of core to our mission in the sense that when we say urgency, I don't mean tomorrow. We don't want to be alarmist. I don't want to scare anyone into saying, okay, if we don't do X, Y, and Z, everything's going to go to, out the window immediately. But there is an urgency here. When Secure World started its work, 15, 20 years ago, the goal was to get anyone to even think about space sustainability. I mean, try convincing someone back then that we needed to have better space situational awareness information, or that we needed to be thinking about space traffic management when we weren't putting up all that many satellites a year. That was hard going. But it's not as if some of the things that have evolved since then couldn't be seen. And so when we say there's an urgency, it's that we have identified a number of areas, and these are commonly shared and understood to a certain extent by this point, where we say, okay, if we don't start paying attention to these, if we don't think about how the space environment is changing, if we don't manage for that, then we are going to end up in a place. And the technology moves quickly, both the technology for, commercialization of space. I mean, we've seen so many new satellites doing such exciting work happening in a variety of different models. I mean, academia is really leaning into this idea of putting up small satellites. We have very large constellations that are going to be providing a very unique, and as we all sit here on our internets around in our homes around the world, an important service around the world. Not to mention the huge benefits that we receive from Earth observation satellites and the proliferation of various capabilities there. And so the technology has moved really quickly. And in addition to that, it's not as if governments have ceased doing their work. We're also seeing the potential for, commercial human spaceflight to commercial destinations. I mean, that wasn't something that I think we certainly knew it was possible 15 years ago, but now we're on the verge of that happening. And in some cases, pieces of it already have. And so that's where the urgency comes from, is that, because we have so much happening, we also need to make sure that we're putting in the guardrails that need to be there so that that can continue to happen. And generally, you don't get a lot of pushback on the concept, right? There's no space company or government or even academic institution that's going to say, oh yeah, we don't care about this at all. Like it's infinite. We can, the basics are understood. Now the question is, okay, but what does that actually look like? What do each actor in the space realm, the space industry, the whole community, what is our role in making sure that space sustainability is a real thing and that we don't get out ahead of ourselves? Because each of us are acting and doing really exciting things, but potentially that contributes to problems with debris, potentially problems with spectrum. I mean, debris is the obvious one, but there are other areas that we, at least at Secure World, lump into space sustainability, because it goes back to the idea of an environment that is peaceful, safe, secure, and usable. And so that means every aspect of that really needs to be looked at and considered. So the urgency isn't, oh no, we're at the edge and it's all going to be terrible, but we could be close to that fairly soon. And more importantly, because we do all generally understand that this is important and acknowledge that, okay, well, that means the urgency is about what do the solutions actually look like? What does government need to do? What does industry need to do? What do other actors need to do?
We will try to tap into a few of the topics you just mentioned. And I mean, could we imagine what will happen? I mean, I grew up with our Space Patrol Enterprise, or Captain Kirk, and our German version Raumpatrouille Orion, and I mean, they always talked about humans somewhere in the universe. So, can you maybe give us some more context on the why in the question of sustainability? Because we will talk about later on about greenwashing and all these things that come with it. But why do we need this sustainability in it?
Yeah, this is something that we talk a lot about at Secure World. It's actually what I work on more so than my colleagues. So you mentioned that I'm the director of space application programs. And so a big part of my job is to look at exactly that, the why. And look, I imagine most people on this Space Cafe are space enthusiasts in some form. So a part of us has to step back and remember that just because we think space is really cool, we get excited about it, and we all do. That's not actually why my organization exists, and it's not actually why we care about space sustainability. It's nice, it's important, but the real point here for us is the benefit that humanity receives from space activities, whether it's from GPS and similar satellites, whether it's from space exploration and the technologies that have been developed out of that, or whether it's from the actual data that we receive from Earth observation satellites. I mean, the list goes on, and I generally think that this community here is fairly familiar with the basic concept of how important space is. But something that I like to stress is that the possibilities, I think every industry likes to think that its opportunity to expand is exponential. I might question that normally, but in space, especially when it comes to applications, we're only at the beginning. Disaster prediction, climate change mitigation, understanding agriculture in our oceans, and human rights monitoring. These are fairly well-known examples, but there are so many more examples that are being developed, pilots that are being looked at. And really, there's very few industries and activities around the world that wouldn't potentially benefit from understanding their own actions or being able to conduct certain analyses or monitor certain things via space data. So, I mean, the opportunity for benefit is really, we're only just breaking into what that really looks like. And it's slow, right? Like, people in other industries, you do your job and you've done it the way you always do, but we're seeing that change and that adaptation and that integration of space data into a wide variety of ways. And I think that's only going to continue. And so when we talk about ensuring space sustainability, we're not just talking about ensuring what we do now and what access and the uses we have, although those are incredibly important too, but also what we might need in the future, where we can better understand things, where we can track and monitor and all of that. So I think the why is really important. I also think we can't ignore that when we talk about policies and solutions and that, because who the end user is, as I just said, is really, it's everyone, but more importantly, it's every level. So it's the person with their cell phone, it's a health professional, it's a policymaker. I mean, all these people can use space data to do their jobs and to live their lives. But that also means that they need to be a part of this conversation, and they need to understand what's happening in terms of space sustainability, that it's not just the people who are experts at this, that we all need to, that those conversations affect a lot of folks. And while they may not be involved in the technical side of it, I do actually think that if you don't tell the story of why, you don't get to solutions very quickly, because that's what's really driving people to look for solutions, is this benefit that we receive.
But I mean, we shouldn't be that blunt. We do compete with a number of other issues globally. Climate change, to wars, to a shortage of food, which we will see very, very soon, pandemic, and so on and so forth. So what has to come first? What has to come in a sequence? I mean, you mentioned the pilots, the different silos. So it seems that this topic of sustainability, like many other issues, is tackled by experts globally in their subjects, in their areas, in their silos. So from the whatever propulsion, from the points. But is there a chance to overcome this silo thinking, this silo, call it silo behavior? I don't know if that makes sense as a word, but you know, the separation of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely something that concerns me. It's part of the reason that really drove us to take on certain activities at Secure World Foundation, because we absolutely observe this both within our community, within the space community, and external to the space community. I'll speak a little bit more about within the space community, just in terms of space sustainability. What I typically see is, we think of it as one community because it's kind of small. I mean, we're not like, it's not as big as, many industries out there. But at the same time, we really do see siloed behavior, siloed thinking. We have different conferences on various topics. People who research certain things kind of focus on that. And so one way to think of it is, at least from a sustainability perspective, you have your security folks over here, and you have your commercial people over here, and your debris people who are very passionate over here. Like, I work a lot in the Earth application world, and let me tell you, they don't think about any of these things. And this applies to regular industry, outside of the space industry as well. And that kind of siloed thinking is fine for when it comes to producing certain work products or managing certain aspects of things. But when we talk about space sustainability, it's not helpful, and it does need to be overcome, because a good example of this, I think we're all aware of, the increase in activity in anti-satellite weapons testing in the last few years, following, a lull in that kind of activity. And typically those kinds of things are discussed in the security communities, space security folks, people who work with the military, that's what they do and that's their expertise. And that's fine to a certain extent, especially when it comes to the technical side of it. But the potential effects of any particular testing that creates debris potentially affects all of us. I mean, it affects industry, it affects governments, it affects the ISS and potentially human spaceflight. I mean, there's real danger there. That's why Secure World a few years ago put out our open source threat assessment on counterspace capabilities to try to move and break through some of those silos and say, okay, we understand that a lot of you have classification, you can't talk about it because of where you got the information. So let's talk about what we can talk about, which is what it's known publicly. And it turns out a lot is known publicly. I think that report is up to like 900 citations or something like that. And so there is a basis for having a public conversation that involves not just the military, but also involves other actors within the government, the commercial industry, and researchers who are actually trying to look at the actual data from these debris creating events to see, okay, well, where is the danger and how do we work on that? And so I think that's a really good example of siloed thinking that was really dangerous and potentially led us to think, oh, there's no big deal here, or for people to not understand this threat. And that's a good example of something where, understanding the threat means that we can potentially take action. We've seen a lot of governments recently have shown an interest in saying, okay, we have done this, but we want to stop doing this because of the danger that we see. And so we can only have those conversations if we break through silos.
But it's interesting that you mentioned the ASAT or community or thinking. I think you, or at least your team or members, were also at the UNIDIR conferences, the various one where that was topical for years. And then you have the Outer Space Institute coming up with their open letter, what we also supported and talked with Dave Kendall and Mike Byers and so on. And then Aidan Little brought it up from the UNIDIR or made this proposal to the first, or I think of first assembly of the United Nations. So is that what kicked it off to bring it to the next level? I mean, your government obviously stated it very clear that you will not do any further ASAT tests or which might be harmful. So I think that's great. But what was the trigger point to come to that?
Well, I mean,
And could you identify it?
Well, I have to admit, this is not my area of expertise, but I will just chime in because we at Secure World all kind of work on a lot of things. I mean, I think just like any political issue, it's a lot of factors. And so, we like to play our role in saying, okay, well, how can we support public dialogue? I think global politics plays a role. I think, as I said, the restarting of testing by India and by Russia definitely alarmed folks, particularly given the change in the space environment since the last the last test had occurred. We just talked about how commercial industry has really taken off in that time and the number of satellites. And so I think that raised the concern level. So I think there's a lot of things that go into this. And like anything, it's hard to identify just one trigger point. But one of my colleagues said, take your wins where you can get them, right? We could all identify what the ideal final solution is. Sure, we'd have a treaty that says X, Y, Z, and we're certainly in support of that. And we'd love to see that someday. But in the meantime, you have to take steps where you can. And so encouraging countries to do exactly what they've just done, encouraging industry to speak up and say, this is a threat to us, like we need action. There's a lot of steps that can be taken on this in a variety of issues. And then I think that's what really matters, is that we as a community all are affected by space sustainability threats, and therefore all need to engage, because we can't just assume someone else is going to take care of it. We haven't seen that. Regulation is not keeping up with activity, and that's a concern. Industry is behaving responsibly, but there are concerns about what that looks like, and are they all talking to each other? I mean, there's always a give and take, and so that's why we really encourage the whole community to participate.
Let's focus or refocus back on our topics today. So, what holds us back in terms of sustainability? I mean, what hinders us to say, yep, we are just limiting the number of launches. We have a more rigorous system of placing satellites in there, and we all behave well. I know it sounds very idealistic.
I mean, in some industries, I would say it is, but in ours, I don't think it's entirely out of the question. Again, I do think the various space actors generally understand the risks, that this is not an environment that you can just go do whatever you want and it's all going to be okay. I mean, I do actually have hope that like that kind of, principled thinking does apply, but that doesn't mean we don't need to work out what it actually looks like and then make sure. Like I don't, are there bad actors? Sure, but they're also in danger from certain behaviors. I mean, it's just not an industry where you can proceed completely unwilling to notice anything. Now that said, I do think there are some things that are really holding us back. I think technology got out ahead of, in an exciting way. I don't say that as a criticism at all. I think that we have a lot of advancements happening very, very quickly. And whenever that happens, that means trying to determine what should be regulated, what shouldn't, what should be done via guidelines and best practice, how industry should behave. It just takes a while to catch up. The wheels of politics also turn very slowly. Again, I think there's a general, I won't say consensus, that's probably a bit too strong, but there is an understanding that, for instance, we need to do space traffic management or whatever your particular terminology is, we need to do that. But for a variety of reasons, that's not happening perhaps as quickly as would be ideal. So some of it is just time, politics, slowness, figuring it all out, getting the right people in the room. I mean, these are typical to any industry. In terms of space sustainability challenges, I think we've already touched on another big one. I mean, I have been very concerned about siloed thinking, so I kind of won't go into that in any great depth. But in general, I think it's not so much a lack of understanding or even will, but that just takes time to actually figure out what solutions look like, and then to actually come to agreement on those, and that there's always kind of a back and forth, which is unfortunate, but it's also encouraging, because it means that I wouldn't identify any like really giant thing that's just impossible. Now, if you want to get into certain technical details in certain areas, sure, there's some problems that are more likely to be solved than others, of course. But overall, I think what we're just seeing is that this is all happening really fast. And that takes time, to come up with solutions and actually implement those.
What can be turning points in space sustainability? I mean, of course, we all know when the Kessler effect hits us, or then it's too late. So I mean, that's what potentially we and our generations or next generation have to avoid. But what can be turning points to even have a sustainable space environment? Or do you believe that we will have this discussion year in, year out?
I think it'll be somewhere in the middle, to be honest with you. So, I mean, the obvious answer is what can be a turning point as well. Tragedy can be a turning point. If something happens, if we have a collision, if we have something, really terrible happen during a launch or something like that, that's obviously going to really bring attention to issues and push people to move faster. Now, that's not a that's not a turning point that we want to see happen. That's an unfortunate circumstance, and is not something that we would ever actively wish for. But I mean, you have to acknowledge it, that typically action happens when, you know, the threat becomes very obvious and very real to everyone. I mean, that's just how the world works. Barring that, I don't think we're going to be having the exact same conversation years from now. I mean, I really do see, I think I've said this a couple times, is that I really do see an understanding that, hey, we are doing really amazing things in space. These are really exciting. They're really beneficial. And we need to make sure that we manage these. I mean, we talk about debris a lot, but there really are a lot of other sustainability issues as well. Spectrum is a really good example. A lot of people's eyes glaze over when we talk about spectrum, unless you work in the spectrum world.
Yeah.
But, you know, that is also a resource that is not infinite. And so when we talk about space time, we also want to look at things like that. And, you know, there are mechanisms being put in place to address all of these things. Now, space is also a global activity. And so when we talk about turning points, I think it's about helping us all understand how we can have international cooperation as well as national action. And that's where I think just continuing to push that, you know, many of the forum that we have out there really encourage that. And I think we just continue to lean on those, both intergovernmental, multilateral forums, as well as industry to industry, you know, and ways that we can incorporate all of that. I mean, for me, one of the biggest turning points will be the more that we can incorporate all of the actors in space. And as we've, you know, discussed at length, you know, those are multiplying quite quickly. The faster we will find solutions. I think that is actually really key, that while nations will absolutely lead the way here, this is going to be a joint effort with a multitude of solutions. You know, there's no one thing. It's not one treaty. It's not one law. It's not one action. It's really going to be, you know, amalgamation of a variety of types of actions that lead us to a much more ideal circumstance. And so really trying to bring everyone to various tables, I think, is really going to be key.
Yep, I hear you. And I just remember that we had times that we haven't been on war with actors that are acting in space, and we couldn't manage it. And now we are on war, or not an active war, at least most of us not. And I think there are some difficulties to keep this dialogue ongoing. But another, I think, sensitive question is for mine, what are people not talking about when it comes to space sustainability? I mean, the same, are we start greenwashing space like we do it with other environmental or issues, that we just sell certificates from to one and each other and say, no, we do everything fine here on our end, but it's just on the back of a country in wherever.
Yeah, so I'll answer that question in reverse. I'll start with the greenwashing, and then I'll move to a few things that I wish we were talking about a little bit more. So the greenwashing is definitely a question, right? You know, when we started this conversation talking about the various meanings of the word sustainability, and it really applies here. And we are absolutely seeing more and more conversation in the space world around, you know, ESG, environmental, social, governance principles, and applying those. And I think we're in a good place right now. I would not say, oh yeah, I'm really seeing, you know, space companies leaning into things that really concern me the way some industries are, where it is clearly greenwashing. But that said, there is a risk and there is a danger that we could just be paying lip service to being a good global citizen, both with our own environment and with the within the environment on Earth. And I do think that distinction is important. Ideally, they're driven by the same kinds of principles for industry and for other actors. It's not just industry. So I think we're in a good place where people are starting to really incorporate that and think about what that means. What does it mean to be a sustainable space company in every sense of the word? And I think there is serious consideration. Now, there is always a danger that it could just descend into, well, I'm just going to do my launches, or I'm just going to put my hat and do whatever, and it doesn't matter. But the good news is we have a pretty outspoken community. So I don't really think anybody would get away with it too long, to be honest. But that said, I will just say that as an industry, I think we have a responsibility to ensure that we really are a good global citizen, that we really do think about space sustainability, which is what my job is, but also that our industry can be held up as an industry that is not engaging in super harmful practices. It is thinking about long-term sustainability. One really good example of this that concerns me And it kind of goes to the first part of your question, what are we not talking about? Which is, I don't think we're doing a very good job of telling our story right now. That I had two events last year on space and climate change. One was quite high level. It was at our summit in June. The other one is ahead of the COP that was held in Glasgow. And at both events, we got questions about rocket launches and carbon emissions, which was really interesting to me because that wasn't really the topic of the event in a community that I thought would be fairly, well versed into how space contributes to climate change in a positive, in terms of fighting and working on climate change and coming up with solutions. So it's interesting to me that that's kind of where people's thoughts went. And so really being clear about something, and that's just an example. There's very similar examples you could do for satellites themselves. And it's just launch is easy to pick on, but I don't want to say that. I just think it's a good example that we as a community really need to be on guard against greenwashing, on guard against making sure that we are a responsible actor and that we are communicating that outwardly. In terms of things that I don't think people are talking about, one topic that we're going to be looking at the Summit for Space Sustainability is actually sustainability issues around the evolving LEO habitat. So I think we're very excited about what's happening there. I see a lot of people very interested in, commercial and new habitats and commercial launch, which is great. But I don't think we've really delved into potentially what are the sustainability concerns that we might need to think about. I think we just haven't really cataloged them yet and thought through them. So that's one example of something where I wish we were paying a little bit more attention. I don't have a particular threat that I'd point to. I just don't see a lot of conversation, for instance, around that. So I mean, as we come up with new activities, there will always be new questions of what does space sustainability look like? And I think the key here is just to continue to have those conversations as we expand our space activities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we set facts with our action and then ask the critical questions thereafter. So we might think that we have learned from our past, but hey, we are humans. We don't learn or this kind of stuff. One remark from you touched me. And that was, how can we tell our story? And I mean, we are a media house, we are press, at least we are press. So what is the role that press can play in your view in that? Because everyone, I mean, you mentioned everyone tries to tell their story. They all have PR or PR agencies and do their releases and so on and so forth. So what is the role that we can play here? What we can play better?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. It's something that I've really been looking at a lot lately because I've grown more and more concerned about this. I think, again, we in the space community, we really love what we do, which is exciting. But I don't know that the public perception of our industry is the same that it was a long time ago. And even then, I mean, there's always been questions of why spend money on outer space when you could be spending money on problems on Earth. And for me, that's a very simplistic question that sort of misses the point, but it's a question that people ask. And I think the perception and the concern about that in the public is growing. And that concerns me. And so when it comes to the space media, which I would distinguish from the regular media, I think they have a huge role to play. And I would also put social media in there as well. I generally think most journalists try to do a really great job of telling these complex technical stories and drawing interest to various scientific advancements and commercial activity. But I don't care for clickbaity headlines that make it seem very dramatic. You click on the article itself is perfectly balanced, but the headline might not be. I think that's particularly a problem in mainstream media. Trying to get that click. Within the space community, I would like to just generally, in the space media, I would like to see more attention on this. I think we assume that the benefits of space are obvious to everyone. And yeah, we just need to put out our press release and we'll be fine. And I don't necessarily see that. I'm particularly concerned about social media as well. And so in the space community, trying to educate those in social media to pay a little bit more attention. There's a lot of, and you can't control everything and everyone. I mean, that's never going to happen. But again, it's one of those things where I think if we all in the space community paid a little bit more attention to how our industry is being covered, what's getting out there, what's not getting good coverage, and also just thinking about the fact we can't write off something just because it's annoying. A good example is there's an Instagram account that has hundreds of thousands of followers. And the only thing I've ever seen them post about this, they post about all sorts of things, right? The only thing I've ever seen them post about space is billionaires and rocket fuel or rocket emissions. And they're not even factually accurate. Like I literally, and people will correct them, I mean, it's not as if we don't have our defenders, but that concerns me because that's what the young generation is seeing and is noting about space. And one article, one thing here and there might not make a difference. But again, I want us to be, seen as what I think we are, which is an industry that has incredible value for life on Earth. And so I do think that just first of all, paying a little more attention to this idea within the media and how we write about things and what we say and what we put out there to be covered. I think is maybe a really important first step. I mean, we can't control the perception of everything, but we don't want it trending in the wrong direction either.
That's right. Yeah, and we see, and I agree with you, we see a changing perception of space in the general audience. So it's starting with some kinds of resistance from here and there. But hey, when it comes to social media, Elon and Mark will fix it for us. So hey, it's in their hand. However, you mentioned what we can do. I mean, at the moment we have the biggest conference on Earth observation happening in Bonn, the Living Planet. Are these kind of conferences, and we will come up then to your conference or in the next step, are these kind of conferences helpful, or is it just serving the community again? I mean, remaining in our bubble?
It's an interesting way to phrase that question. So first of all, I do think they're helpful. Certainly there's so many conferences these days on everything that it can feel a bit overwhelming. And I personally would love to see more that are a little bit more overarching. But that said, I think there's two reasons why they're helpful. The first is just the exchange of ideas. When it comes to solving problems, when it comes to how to use data, when it comes to what we're actually doing with things, those can be very naturally very siloed thinking. And if we really want to create and use space data effectively, efficiently, and for the benefit of everyone, we have to break through a lot of that. And so I do think that just that natural ability to share, to learn from each other, to see what other people are doing, to be inspired, to make connections is incredibly helpful. I will also say that in a post-COVID, if we can say that yet, but in the COVID-esque world that we live in, I also think it's really important. We have all been isolated from each other. Yes, we've done a great job with our Zooms and our contacts. And if you're a fairly established professional, you're doing fine. But young professionals in particular have really suffered from the ability to network and to make connections. But even the rest of us, and I was just saying this to someone else, that there's people that I talk to all the time because I work with them on something. And then there's people I haven't seen in years at this point. Like, it's crazy. And it's really important to share and to connect and to have those ideas. We can do our own work, but so many of the problems that we're trying to solve, either within space sustainability or again, more broadly on Earth, they really are multi-sectoral problems. And in order to solve those, we have to break through those silos. And conferences like the one happening in Bonn, the Living Symposium, are one way to do that. And it's certainly not the only way, or maybe not even the most important. It's hard to say. But if you don't have those opportunities to connect, to interact, to share, to learn, to come up with new ideas, you're not going to move as fast towards any of these problems, towards solving any of these problems.
I'm just asking Chiara to check this wonderful engagement and I think we have 11 questions here in the Q&A and in the chat were question. Get us one or after the next question I'm asking, because we are running out of time. We're getting the yellow flag from our production team already. But hey, that topic is so important for us. We just keep on doing until they switch us off. So
yes, I will have a look.
Okay, wonderful. But before that, Krystal, you're organizing the Summit for Space Sustainability. I think it's a correct wording, in London next month. So what can we expect from that event, besides the fact that it's coming to Europe?
Yeah, we're really excited about that. So the Summit for Space Sustainability started in 2019, and it really sort of makes the case for everything we've been talking about today. That we've reached the point where raising awareness around space sustainability isn't necessarily our focus for the vast majority of issues. We really want to be forward thinking in terms of looking for solutions. We talked a little bit about breaking through silos, and that's very much a goal of ours as well. So as an organization that sort of sits at the nexus of these various space sustainability issues, we wanted to host an opportunity where people who are very interested in this topic, whether broadly or more specifically in one of these specific areas, can kind of come together. And, as a neutral-ish party, meaning that, we aren't the government, we aren't industry, we can ask questions. We really want to sort of, I don't want to say poke the bear because that makes it seem negative, but we have the ability to say, okay, where are some of these specific challenges, like you and I were talking about, like what is the holdup when it comes to active debris removal, or, making progress on not having, further anti-satellite testing or things, that creates debris, or, pick a topic, right? And so this event is really meant to say, okay, every year we're going to look at certain aspects of this and really try to ask some of the tough questions, and also hear from people that maybe we wouldn't always hear from. Can we bring in outside experts? Can we bring in younger people? Can we bring in an organization who might not be a part of this conversation typically, and get those people together? So that's really, you can see the agenda online. You can put it in the chat as well. But we're really trying to be very forward thinking in terms of both addressing current problems. And then, as you said, what are we not talking about? And so we have a couple of really interesting panels on that as well. And then the final bit for us is also kind of addressing young professionals and this connection idea that we were just talking about. And so if someone attends, virtually, we're going to really try to make it a great hybrid event with the opportunity for online participants to be just as able to ask questions. And we're using a nice app for that so that everyone can, feel as much a part of the discussion as possible. For those who are able to attend in person, we're going to be having quite a lot of networking as well, more so than maybe we would have normally done. It's much more of an emphasis this year, given what's been happening for the last 2 years. And then for us, it's also about young professionals. So young professionals are invited to attend at a fairly steep discount. We really want to have them in the audience. Sometimes I get people asking me if they can volunteer, and I'm like, no, we want you to be there as a participant. Like you're part of the industry. Like you should be there, taking action and being a part of this. And so we're also going to be having a special networking event for them as well, which we're going to announce next week. I think it's going to be pretty exciting. I don't want to spoil it here, but really just trying to support the whole community, both in terms of making connections, but having these very serious, substantive discussions as well.
Cool. So it's a fight for talents. I mean, also in our industry now going on. Great. Thank you very much. I know we are completely over time. We will put the link to the conference in our thank you email for all of you. And I would like to hand over to Chiara for not for the rundown of the next events, but just pick one of these really wonderful questions we got. And Krystal, I would like to send this question to you, and if you can provide a written answer, that would be wonderful. If not, or don't feel obliged to do so, but it would be wonderful for our audience to get some feedback. So that's from my end. Chiara, over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Krystal, already. Yes, I've had a look at the questions. They're all incredible. So I just thought I'd go the democratic way and take the one with the most votes. So we have one from Corvin Ilgna, and he says that he recently listened to the opinion of Jim Bernstein in conversation with Torsten, and that there was an idea that was also confirmed in a recent interview that he himself conducted. And the opinion was that for a sustainable framework to come into existence fast, current spacefaring nations need to step up and lead the development through national space law. Now, his question is, do you believe that nations should take the lead, or is the development of international agreements more important, even though it will take much longer?
And yes, we do have a very engaged and very informed audience.
Excellent. So you want me to do, I can respond now, Torsten, or you want me to do in writing?
No, just for this one question that Chiara just raised.
Yes, this is a tough one. And I'm going to kind of take the easy way out. I'm not going to lie. I think it's both. Yes, I absolutely would love to see nations step up and identify the places where new international law for space activities. And I certainly believe there are areas where that would be the best and most efficient solution. And I encourage countries to do that. But as a pragmatist, I don't necessarily want to say, well, if we can't do that, then nothing else is possible. Because I just don't think that's true. And two, it's not a practical approach. Like these things aren't one or the other. I think I said this earlier today in that the real solutions for space sustainability are going to be an amalgamation of a lot of different solutions, of which that is one, and it would be an ideal one and would be really important. But that doesn't mean that actions that we take elsewise, whether it's nations stepping up for non-binding activities, as we've recently seen in some areas, or for other actors working together for other solutions. We're a great believer in that combined approach, and I honestly believe that not only is that what's practical, but it's also what will actually succeed. If we simply say the only thing we can do is this one thing, well, then we've put all of our eggs in one basket, to use an overused cliche, and that's just not a great way forward. And frankly, it also cuts out some parties. Like some of these things, I just don't think will be solved that way. Some things, yes, but others, no. And so I think we have to really take that multifaceted approach in all of our actions. Doesn't mean we should let nations off the hook and that they should be, not doing the things they should be doing. But it's absolutely something that we need to be practical about.
Great.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, and I mean, looking at the time, I think we'll stop here now. Thank you so much again, Krystal. It was really informative and a really inspiring talk. Before we leave for today, let's just look at our next exciting events that are coming up. So end of this week, on Friday, the 27th of May, we have our next Space Café Brazil by Ian Grossner, live from the workshop on space resources in Santos. And this will, of course, be in Portuguese. Then on the 31st of May, we have our 33 minutes with Adnan Al-Mohari of Torreya. And then kicking it off, the 1st of June, we have our next Space Café Italy by Dr. Imagati, who will be talking with the CEO of Thales Alenia Space Italy in Italian. Then on the 7th of June, we'll have our 33 minutes with Maided Pariente. On the 9th of June, our next Space Café Moriba's Vox Populi with Professor Moriba Jah. And on the 14th of June, our 33 minutes with Jennifer Menner. As always, all our events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And we love to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily and our biweekly newsletters. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today or help us out in the supporter program. Again, huge thank you to Krystal for this talk and for being our guest. Thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week in and week out.
And for let us run over. So yes. Thank you, Frank.
Lucky us. I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. A huge thank you again for your participation, both in the chat and in the Q&A, for asking all these great questions, and we will get back to you soon. And hopefully see you this week and in the next week. In the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media, and don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you so much.
Thank you.